Hello and welcome to Why Do We Do That? A psychology podcast that deconstructs human behavior from the perspectives of social scientists, psychologists, and others that use applied psychology in their work. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Moyer. In this episode, I sit down with Dr. Justin Puder. Justin earned his PhD in psychology from Auburn University. He is a licensed psychologist who spent 7 years in a university counseling setting and now has his own private practice based in South Florida. He's also an instructor at Florida Atlantic University, where he teaches a course on mindfulness-based stress reduction. Justin is also very active on Instagram and TikTok, where he produces videos that cover a wide range of topics in mental health. You can find him at A Modern Therapist on both Instagram and TikTok. Justin and I had a long chat about mental health in college students, specifically the most common mental health issues he encounters, the types of personal experiences he hears about, and how that can impact a student's well-being. And we also discuss some of the goals and techniques of his therapeutic process, including a deeper dive into one specific practice, mindfulness-based stress reduction. Unfortunately, this episode was recorded prior to the pandemic, so we weren't able to get into the specific social isolation issues that have been plaguing people this past year. However, many of the insights we discuss can apply to mental health, pandemic or not. So I really hope you enjoy it. All right, we're here with Justin Puder. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
Great. So most of your counseling experience has been with college-age students. So roughly 7 years you've been working in a university environment. Yeah. Let's just start off just talking about the top three issues that you tend to receive with your clients.
Yeah, the top three for college-age students generally are anxiety, depression, and relationship issues. Normally how that presents is isolation, feelings of adjusting to a new environment, and having to start over making friends, because a lot of people are coming to college and, again, transitioning from the social and peer groups that they knew and having to start all over again.
Okay, so now, like when I think of a college student who is having anxiety to the point of reaching out to a professional, I think my mind immediately goes to, okay, what was this student's environment like growing up? So let's talk a little bit about some of the causes of bad anxiety. Is it just a linear path between kind of overprotective parents and going through adolescence having a lot of anxiety, or is it a little bit more complicated than that, do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think it's more complicated. Parents have a lot to do with it. The upbringing, the environment they grew up with, their biology that they've just been handed, right, that they didn't choose from their parents. There's a lot of things, but it doesn't always have to have, especially in college students, it can start as they're starting in college because it's a major transition. When you think about what it's like growing up in a town, again, knowing the same people for many, many years, seeing the same faces, and then coming to a place and, whoa, how many people here do I actually know? That adjustment itself can cause significant anxiety.
Yeah, I am about to start teaching a freshman population, so I'm anticipating, a certain amount of transitional anxiety.
Yeah.
Is there what type of tactics do you like to incorporate when you're helping students with these transitional periods?
Yeah. I'm a big person. I like to start with their own kind of toolkit and empower them to build from what they already know. And so what that usually looks like is asking these kind of broad questions of like, how have you gotten connected before? How have you made friends before? Especially when a lot of the freshmen who come into the counseling center early on, that's their chief complaint. I feel anxious here. I don't know anyone. The interesting thing about that we'll see is a lot of them have never thought about, how do I actually make friends? How do I become known to other people? Because they've just known these people in their town, their high school for so many years, they didn't necessarily have to branch out. So for some of them, this will be the first time they think about, me, how do I reach out and get to be known by other people? Which is such a cool thing to explore with somebody.
Now, okay, so in these conversations, I imagine that you probably get a good sense of their base level of social skills. Now, if you just kind of look at where our culture's at in terms of, let's just say the social skills or the conversational skills of people within the age of, I don't know, let's say 16 to 23 or something like that.
Yeah.
It looks a little bit different from prior generations. There's a lot more socialization happening in digital worlds, right? You're making, you're making and keeping friends through social media, through your computer, versus making and keeping friends face to face. Do you feel that is changing the base level of social skills that these students have when they're trying to make friends in a new environment?
I think it has to have an impact for sure. Being a young therapist, I don't have any like longitudinal experience. It'd be neat to ask somebody who's been in the field a long time, like, you've been working with teens for X number of years. Have you noticed a change? But for me, in talking with students, with college students, it is different. Like, they'll feel much more comfortable, again, hashing something out through text. And they'll be telling me a story of like, I had a fight with my roommate. And it will take me about 10 minutes to realize, oh, everything you're saying, you didn't actually talk to your roommate face to face. This was through text. And knowing what we know about, social connection and reading, nonverbals and all these things, I have a lot of concerns about that of, okay, how do we transition from using technology as sort of a safe space and easy way to connect quickly to when we want to have meaningful connection and conversation, ultimately it has to be face to face.
Interesting. So now you kind of just painted a picture that a large chunk of the of general anxiety that students are having is about this new environment, new transition, right?
Absolutely.
Now I've also read some articles, seen some things about young people having anxiety about very broad social issues. So who's president, climate change, things that are, and again, my concern is that these aren't appropriate issues to be anxious about because they're kind of non-actionable. I mean, sure, you can set a game plan and take steps to be active in terms of spreading the message of climate change or electing a different president. But do you think that do you think that the anxiety that's associated with these social issues, I don't know if you've encountered it, but do you think that's well placed or?
Yeah, it definitely sounds like what you're hitting on is something I agree that there's a balance here, and especially putting a lot of energy towards things that we don't have a ton of control of. But part of me as a therapist, my job is to really kind of check myself and ask myself, is this just something that I don't personally, feel a lot of anxiety around? Or is this something that clearly, this client, this student that I'm working with, that this is starting to kind of make them feel ungrounded because they're obsessing or just becoming, again, so anxious about it. And it's a tough balance. And that's something where I don't think I know right away. Like when someone starts saying like, oh, and our president did this and that, early on it can feel like, yeah, this is somebody just expressing themselves, their point of view, and their stress about it. But when it becomes repetitive and every single time, I absolutely believe there's a balance that, yeah, you can form different political groups and maybe even protest in these things. But ultimately, I think you have to invest in yourself and know, what do I have control of? And that's a hard question for me to answer for somebody else.
Mm-hmm. So have you encountered any specific clients that have something that broad? And if so, I mean, what does, I know that therapy is more about developing a relationship. It's not necessarily advice giving, right?
Sure.
But is that type of anxiety, do you find that you can penetrate and make progress with that?
I'm thinking of a couple of examples when, yeah, somebody did have a really broad anxiety like that. And I don't feel like I was very effective in penetrating that. And I think it goes back to when people have very rigid beliefs about things, that they tend to hold on to them even harder in times of stress. And in both of these instances, I had felt that they were holding on to this thing that they really didn't have a lot of influence in changing a broad issue, exactly like you're mentioning. And they felt more comfortable externalized saying, no, the problem is, again, this president, versus I don't feel control of my life right now. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of interesting. We call that externalizing, when somebody feels more comfortable, again, pointing fingers in different directions than sort of taking responsibility for the things that are within their realm of control. But I agree with you that there's like a sensitive balance here, because of course you want people to express their opinions and vote and feel like they can make a difference. But in both these cases that are coming to my mind, I had felt like it had become so over the top that they were starting to neglect their own needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So, it seems that it seems like anxiety about broad social things, it seems like that cannot exist without the omnipresence of social media. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about that for a second. So one thing that is an unfortunate byproduct of all of these social media resources that we have floating around is that it makes social comparisons very easy, and they're literally always there, right? 50 years ago, like, you might look at your neighbor, you might talk to your friend, on the phone,
right?
And you'd go to school,
yeah.
But that is your realm of social comparison, and when you go home, you have escaped the circle of social comparisons. Now, every time you get home, you have a computer, you have your phone. Social comparisons are literally everywhere. Mm-hmm. Do you, in your experience, do you feel that that constant exposure contributes to any sort of the anxiety?
I think so. And the first thing that came to my mind as you were talking about that is body image concerns. I can't remember the last time I had a client where, if I pressed about that, like, do you feel insecure about your body? Do you find yourself comparing the way you think about your body to other people? In the young students that I work with, it's through the roof, like almost every single one. And I think it relates back to what you're saying, that we're just constantly bombarded through Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever it is, of what the current ideals are for what a man should look like and what a woman should look like. And of course, like we can point to examples that kind of go against this, like, oh, Target using, body positive models. And I think that's great steps forward, but it doesn't trump the fact that when you look at who has the most followers, what do these people look like? That young people, like anyone else, is picking up on, okay, what does it mean for this person to have 16 million followers? Why does this person have this many followers?
Yeah, and what's also interesting about that is, whereas 50 years ago, these individuals, these role models, they might have had some. It was likely that they had some sort of skill set, right? If you look at famous people that you're comparing it to, might be a professional athlete or an actor. 50 years ago, they had something, right? They had a skill or something that put them on the map, and so there was some substance to looking up to these figures. Now you see people that are famous for being popular, right? If you know what I mean, and
Yeah,
it scares me because part of me thinks that young people are just going to decide that their goal in life is not to get good at something. It's not to master something like someone that you might see on television, but it's to literally be their modus operandi is to become famous.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's great evidence to show that's exactly what's happening. Because when you think about it, as soon as you get to this threshold that whoever you are, whatever you're doing, when you have millions of followers, you become a marketing company and you can sell whatever. You can become, a brand ambassador for whatever. And so I agree with you that there's certainly a lot of examples in pop culture where we can pick people and it's hard to understand, okay, what is the skill set here? Besides that, they come from money, they're very attractive, but that's kind of where the list ends. And they're doing things that maybe many young people would like to be doing with the cars, the fashion. But yeah, I think it's a legitimate concern of what kind of message does that send about what you should be doing with your life?
Now, so from the young people that you've talked to, if you had to summarize, what are some of their self-developed meanings, like their purposes? What have you seen in terms of like what is driving them? What is driving them to do well in school? What is driving them to obtain a job? I mean, is it? I would hope it's not entirely some sort of shallow thing like I just proposed, but I am curious as to what the actual deeper motivators are for young people.
Yeah, I do feel like I hear the full range. Like I hear, again, like I want to make a difference in the world. I want to help people. So, I'm not sure what form that might look like, but I'm considering going to law school or medical school. I definitely hear the things, I just want to make mom and dad proud. I come from a family where I'm a first generation college student, and that means a lot to me to take this opportunity to do the best I can. And then I feel like a lot of college students that come to the door for the college counseling center, that's very much I have no idea. Like they're taking it semester by semester of, I'm just trying to find classes that I don't fall asleep in and that I want to skip every day. So I do feel like I hear the full range. It's definitely not, I don't feel like these younger generations are vapid in that the things they say to me, I'm like, okay, but what are you really trying to develop here?
Right. So we've talked a little bit about anxiety, and of course, so anxiety is sort of a problematic form of stress, right? Right. So a lot of your treatment treatments involve reducing stress in young people.
That's right.
Could you talk a little bit about stress, specifically? What could you just give us a quick definition of stress, perhaps? I know you have some YouTube videos I'll talk about at the end.
I appreciate you
look
pitching
up,
that.
Yeah,
right now it's just my mom watching.
No, I've definitely watched a few of them.
You and my mom, great.
Yeah. Hey, it's small. We're a small but very, very proud
I love
group of viewers.
I love it.
Just because stress is kind of it's a pretty vague term. So could you talk about what you think of when we talk about stress?
Yeah, so it's exactly like you're setting this up. Stress is a normal occurrence day to day, and stress definitely isn't always a bad thing. When we think about stress, we want to think about having the right amount of stress. And a good way to think about that is if you've ever worked a crappy part-time job and you felt no motivation to go to that whatsoever, you just didn't care. That's a perfect example of not enough stress. You didn't feel heightened enough, motivated enough to put energy into this thing because maybe you thought, oh, this doesn't have anything to do with my future. I don't really care about the tasks I'm doing here. But that's almost not enough stress. But
right.
then
it's like you're almost getting into apathy.
Apathy,
right? So,
yeah. Who gives a crap? Yeah, that's exactly what that is. But in the middle lies the right amount of stress, a job where you care about, maybe you have certain goals that you want to make, maybe it helps you grow. The same is true, you could use a class as an example. Maybe it challenges you, the tests are tough, you have to study, you have to learn the material. But too much stress, it again, is us activating this fight or flight system and releasing cortisol into our bloodstream too often, where we're just becoming way too aroused too many times throughout the day. And again, for a lot of young people, it's not having outlets for this stress. So they pull all-nighters, they're drinking a lot of energy drinks, they're going from class to class, sometimes to work, and there's not enough regulating activities to pull them back to balance.
Yeah, I'd like to underscore that point about good and bad stress, right? Stress is it's an evolved response to threats, right?
Absolutely.
And the whole point of this response is to prime our bodies for specific types of behaviors. Now, of course, the big problem is that this stress response, this release of cortisol, was formed in a completely different world with a completely different set of challenges, right?
That's right.
These are, the stress response was, oh crap, tiger, or we are vulnerable to attack, right? This is all the pre-human and early human situations. So, when you bring that primitive stress response into our modern world, it's going to go off, but it's going to go off for completely different set of behaviors. It's going to go off for, oh crap, my assignment is due, I have a date coming up. This is all stress. Oh, this is driving me crazy. So how do we structure a good life if we're trying to align ourselves with this kind of ancient wiring?
I think, and this is not something that I feel like we're taught a lot, but I think you have to start paying attention to your own body stress signals. And this is something where, again, in our on-the-go kind of level up, hectic life, I don't think many of us pause often to ask ourselves, how have I been feeling lately? And because stress can manifest within the body, emotionally, cognitively, in a lot of different ways, which I do have a great video on. But because of this, I don't know for a lot of us if we're taught, okay, this is my body or this is my emotional expression of stress. And if I'm repetitively, day after day, hitting these certain thresholds, this means something has to change. Not, okay, I need to drink another Red Bull and tough it out, but I actually need to switch up my behaviors and again find a better balance.
So yeah, we're transitioning very nicely into your specific treatment modality, but yeah, I wanted to comment on that. It is so easy to go through life on autopilot, where day to day you're not really paying attention to your body. It's literally just what is next.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite quotes is that you are not your thoughts, right? Everyone, by default, we just think that when I have a little spot of inspiration, like, oh, I'm hungry, oh, I'm gonna go eat, or hey, that guy called me a name, I'm gonna tell him to F off. We just by default think that whatever pops in our head is who we are, and that just goes out. And all that is influenced by whether we're hungry, we're tired. All of that is playing a role. So you like to focus on mindfulness as a method of dealing with stress and this constant stream of consciousness. Talk a little bit about mindfulness for us.
Yeah, mindfulness is a practice that dates back into Buddhism. It's over 2,000 years old, but starting in the early 80s, it was brought into Western medicine by a guy named Jon Kabat-Zinn, where he basically studied under the Zen master and realized, wow, like these mindfulness techniques, I think this could help a lot of people out. And since the 80s, it's really grown in psychology specifically as a way for us to start paying attention to our thoughts, to our body, to the moment. What is happening in this exact moment? Because you set that up perfectly. We spend so much time, especially when we're stressed, just drifting away in these thoughts. The perfect example of that is we've all had the experience where you drive somewhere and you just end up there. And you're like, I know I drove the vehicle, but I don't have awareness or really remember much of the ride. What we know, taking that example, is when people have chronic stress, that's exactly what they're experiencing. I'm not actually remembering much of the ride because I'm so stuck in this worried, anxiety, stress-filled cognitive state. But mindfulness is doing a bunch of specific activities that pull us and focus on the present.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think a lot of people will misinterpret that stress as I'm exhausted, but you could, when you're doing something that you're passionate about for 6 hours, you might feel exhausted, but it's a completely different type of exhaustion, right? It's not even an energy level thing, because you could do that passionate activity. If you're into volunteering and you go volunteer for 4 hours, you could be on your feet the whole time, and then you might have a little pep in your step when you leave. But you take 2 hours of something you hate doing. I'm exhausted. Oh, it's like, but you're not right. Yeah. You're not really exhausted.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's something we have people pay attention to when they start practicing mindfulness, is the difference between nourishing and depleting activities, right? Because exactly what you're describing, when we're doing an activity, no matter how many hours we're doing, if it's nourishing, again, 6-8 hours, we'll feel excited, we'll feel upbeat. But when something's depleting, it doesn't have to be very long that, again, after an hour or so, we might just feel like, oh man, I need a nap. I feel like, again, I need to just reset everything. But unfortunately, I do feel like our culture is one that's like, ignore all those signals, put your head down, keep working hard. And again, it's all going to get better with you just continuously grinding.
Yeah, I've worked in both relaxed academic atmospheres and sort of the intense corporate ones. And yeah, I mean, there is a it is emotionally draining to do something for a long time that you don't really want to be doing or that you're not inspired or passionate about. And it is tough.
Did you feel like during that time that you were able to like find other things to ground and reset, or does just that experience of going to a job that, again, that wasn't nourishing you too draining?
So in my specific example, it was I was working for a company doing analytics, and it was all encompassing. It was not I'm going to go home and work out and I'll feel great, or I'm going to hang out with some friends and that'll balance me out.
Right.
It was the 8 hours just trumped everything else. I only had energy to come home and kind of veg out. And that was ultimately what led me to change my profession. As now I'm back teaching again. Yeah. It was all encompassing. Yeah. And I immediately felt the stress lift off as soon as I started my new role back in academia. Yeah.
And I think I just to echo that and champion that, I think that's an awesome example, because something in there had told you like enough is enough. Where again, I feel like a lot of the message we get in the mainstream culture is, no, you're probably just not pushing hard enough.
That's definitely the case, and even more so. So, what you just reminded me of was that, it was very difficult. I spent a lot of time thinking about making this transition, but ultimately I pulled a trigger. And in my experience, when I find people that are experiencing too much stress in a job, particularly one that they don't like, is that there's a lack of action. And it's fascinating to me, because you could lay out on a silver platter the reasons why they should leave the job, and they'll actually agree with it. Yeah, I should leave the job. But they won't. Why do you think? Why do you think when people are presented with an obvious problem in their life that they're not willing to act? What is the difference between acting and not acting in your view?
I would say, Ryan, you're the ideal client. Anytime we get a client, or I get a client who's risk averse, they're someone who's able to take a risk and kind of adapt from there, and they're in what we'd call an action stage, which means they're willing to try something out, see how it goes, and adapt going further. That's always a beautiful place when a client comes in. I feel like that's actually not the norm. Most people who come into therapy, we'd consider them, thinking of the stages of therapy, in either pre-contemplative, meaning they're not really aware of the problem, or they're contemplative, where they're aware of the problem, but they haven't really thought through what the steps would be to fix it, or they don't really feel that interested in it yet.
Well, I'll keep that in mind if I do decide to look for a therapist. I don't currently have a therapist, but I'll add you to my my list of potentials.
That would be a conflict of interest, but I greatly appreciate. But
it would pad your numbers. It'd make
wow,
look at this guy. Yeah.
I can see that. But no, I feel like that kind of is the essence of therapy, is not necessarily telling people what they should do, because most people know what they should do. It's figuring out what are the reasons why they're not able to proceed. And those reasons are vast, from fears to lack of confidence, lack of self-esteem, just not having good planning skills. But again, it's always refreshing when you have a client who's willing to take a risk and will process with you afterwards what that adjustment's been like.
So I want to come back to some of the other things that you encounter in the therapeutic sessions, but let's talk a little bit more. I want to stay on the mindfulness a little bit more. So um, what are your goals for recommending mindfulness in terms of as a coping mechanism?
Yeah, I think, and I appreciate you framing it that way, because I know whether you're a psychologist or somebody out there, you can start trumpeting whatever you really believe in as the way. And I definitely don't feel like mindfulness is the way. I do feel like it's a way. But I feel like a lot of people have a lot of negative connotations around meditation. And what I most often hear is people kind of saying, "Oh, I've tried that once and it wasn't for me. I just thought the whole time and I couldn't clear my mind." And I feel like that's such a heartbreak for me because they haven't been handed the right frame. And that's mindfulness is just like exercise. Like when you go exercise, each time you exercise, you feel very different, right? Like some days when I'm like, it's late at night and I'm like, oh, I should really go for a good walk, with my dogs. But sometimes I feel like crap. You know what I mean? I'm like tired and I'm sluggish, but it's still, exercise is still good for me. And meditation and mindfulness is the same way. Each time you go do it, you might experience something totally different. Like you might be drifting off a lot. Sometimes I am thinking about stuff, planning out the rest of my life. But when you have those gaps, those moments where you're just focused on whatever you're trying to focus on, the breath, sensations in the body, smells, sound, those gaps of just being present, what we know are great for your mental health.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to disagree with you because I've tried exercise once. It didn't work for me. So I've moved on. I appreciate the advice on this exercise that you talk about.
That's great.
So I've actually I would consider myself a novice to mindfulness practice, and I'll let you recommend anyone if you want, but I've been following Sam Harris's Waking Up program, which is an intro, is a daily guided mindfulness meditation, and it will take practice, right? This isn't a pill. It's a practice, right? And at least I speaking for myself, the benefit has been the paying mind to that gap between incoming information during your day and acting or behaving, saying something. Mm-hmm. There's a little gap there that is so important. It's what you do in between someone cutting you off. Do you honk? Do you run them off the road? You don't. Mm-hmm. You don't want to do any of that. There's that little window that I think mindfulness can help with. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about is that part of the model of mindfulness, is to slow down your thoughts and because I know there's the physical element, but mm-hmm. Is it also filtering thoughts?
Absolutely. And I think that's very much the practice is whatever we're noticing, whatever change. That's a great example of someone cutting you off in traffic. When you're in a mindful state, you can notice the changes that are going on. Oh, I'm feeling pissed off. I'm noticing I tightened the grip on the steering wheel. I'm starting to hold my breath. I'm having the thought of who would dare cut me off in traffic, but you can notice all these things arising and choose a path instead of just being reactive. And I think this is one of the first things people feel in that gap is this sense of sort of like you're putting your hand back on the remote control. Like your thoughts aren't controlling you anymore. Having an emotion isn't controlling you anymore. You can notice I'm having this thought of who dare cut me off, but I can let that pass. Or I'm feeling really angry in this moment, and do I have to act on it right now? But that's a beautiful thing to experience those gaps and just notice what is, instead of what you had described before of anything you feel, anything you think, well, that's the truth, and I have to act on it right now.
Yeah, I would hope that, so obviously mindfulness is hard to study, right? Because it's kind of hard to have a blind control group for studying mindfulness. That's right, one of the issues with it. I hope that it's not the case that people that already have good self-control are benefiting from these things. How is mindfulness different from more traditional approaches to impulse control? I mean, does it fall in line with the anger management programs that you used to hear about? Does it fall in line with the more traditional U.S. based psychological approaches to handling impulse control?
I think the only thing that really overlaps there is trying to create a pause. But I think mindfulness practices more specifically have you focusing for extended periods of time on just one thing. And again, showing you that you can actually focus and keep your attention held in a place and start having this experience of noticing thoughts change and drift by, feelings change and drift by, body sensations change and drift by, and that you're noticing, again, you're changing weather. And that's really, again, what you do when you practice mindfulness is you're zooming in on one thing and just noticing kind of this dialogue that's coming up. You don't have to do anything about it, which I know a lot of kind of traditional ways to change impulse control or anger management is you have to do this thing. You have to count to 7. And it's more of like more action oriented instead of, again, feeling like, no, when you cultivate mindfulness, it's just about the noticing. You're just noticing what's arising instead of feeling, no, I'm in doing mode. You're more in being mode for mindfulness.
That makes sense. Now, obviously, I'm a huge fan of mindfulness. I'm willing to incorporate it into my life. But let me ask you something, because here's one of my concerns about the trend towards mindfulness. So it seems on the surface that mindfulness would be most effective if you are a competent human being who can make and achieve goals. So you have the ability to go out and work a full day and contribute, and you're just stressed out. You can go to your job and have meetings. You can go to you can work as a bartender or a server. You have the ability to act and you're self-sufficient. It seems like it'd be particularly helpful there. Do you think that it's also effective if you don't have that? So what I'm thinking of is if you're a young person who, a college age individual who is sort of anxious about everything, think of like a fragile person who has trouble making and achieving goals. Do you think that mindfulness is the first course of action versus something that's more that will make somebody more resilient, like treatments that would build up their resilience or their grit versus making them better at dealing with stress?
I know, and it's like a typical therapist response of it kind of depends, but I feel like in my mind, if somebody's anxiety and stress is sort of the predominant thing that's sweeping them away from being able to, build certain skills or resiliency, then starting with mindfulness isn't going to set you back by any means, because them learning to regulate themselves, learning to slow down, learning to pay attention, be less reactive, is going to be helpful. But for sure, you're going to have to be incorporating, skill building, especially, again, the students that come to mind for me is students that are really lacking in their social skills. And it might not necessarily be because of social anxiety, but the ways they communicate, the ways they interact with people are very indirect and have a low probability of forming close relationships. So I think mindfulness can be a part of that equation, but I agree with you that it's definitely not going to be a standalone treatment if somebody's really lacking other skills that, again, they're needing to navigate the world.
Yeah, I think sometimes as you know, my background is in research. Sometimes as somebody who's not a practitioner, you kind of forget that you have to take these multi-pronged approaches. It's not just one modality or the other.
Right.
I think that's something that I think a lot of people default to. It's like, well, what do you prefer, this or this, or cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness? Like, oh, I prefer, right? I guess it is more of a, like you said, it depends, and it might be a bunch of different tactics.
And that's much more the norm, exactly like you said, of what real therapy looks like. And I think the thing that gets pushed on the public often is cognitive behavioral therapy. And if you ask any therapist about that, someone in the public, they've been told by an MD or someone else that they need cognitive behavioral therapy. And they'll ask, such therapists, do you do cognitive behavioral therapy? Almost every therapist is going to be like, yes, part of my therapy is going to be cognitive and involve you changing your behaviors. But the reality between therapists, how much you stick to kind of CBT protocol and how that looks like out of the textbook and what it actually looks like in real therapy are completely different, which makes, studying therapy and therapeutic protocol really interesting.
So let's stay on that for just 1 second. So, you've been practicing or you've been seeing clients for 7+ years.
Yeah.
What is the biggest difference between what you've learned in training versus what it's like to actually see clients?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. And so I think it's just such a succinct response, right? A lot. But I remember reading Judith Beck's CBT book and thinking, it's this simple. If I just highlight someone's automatic thought and drill down to the core belief, all is well. But in reality, the way things play out in therapy is, yes, that is the overarching map of how you're going to start using CBT, but what it looks like with people's defenses, with people's, again, lack of skills, with people's, diversity and different cultures that they come from, it looks so different. So I guess the simplest way for me to explain it is it's like a baking recipe where you end up using all the same ingredients, but each person needs a different amount of the different ingredients. Like one person, everybody takes sugar, baking powder, vanilla, and this, and yeah, everybody's going to get some of that. But how much each person gets is so different, which makes it a really interesting profession, but also a really subjective one.
Yes. Now, do you practice gluten-free therapy?
I'm completely vegan, gluten-free. I stay with the trends for sure.
As a layperson, I always thought that therapy was involved the therapist kind of intervening in bad thoughts, and then you kind of realize that it's a lot more important to just build a solid relationship. It's not so much advice. It's more, one brain connecting with another brain to help it understand what a good relationship is. So you had mentioned that relationships are also one of the things that your clients will come to talk to you about. What are some of the relationship, whether it's, I assume it's going to be more intimate relationships and friendships, or you get a little bit of both?
You do get a little bit of both, especially roommate issues. Oh, those are my favorite because for most people, again, especially working at a university like Florida Atlantic University, where I spent a long amount of time, this is for a lot of them the first time they're sharing space and they're negotiating how do we use this space, how do we have sleep routines, all this stuff. But yeah, a lot of roommate dynamics of again, how do I communicate in an open, assertive way instead of just avoiding and saying they did this thing, I'm going to cut them out of my life, I'm blocking them. Those are kind of my favorite to negotiate because it's not so easy to get rid of a roommate.
Yeah, I from firsthand experience.
Yeah,
if you take a 4, 5, 18-year-olds and you put them in a room where they've probably never had to communicate their needs to anyone in their life, you get a little bit of friction, right? Yeah.
It's an interesting experiment we set them up for, right? Because I don't think there's a lot of prep for this. This might be the first time that you're going to be very assertive with your needs and have someone look at you very confused because that doesn't fit, again, what they're wanting their bedtime, routine to look like.
So what are some of the ways that you encourage people to deal with their roommates? What do you need to pay attention to when you're communicating to a roommate?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things is just encouraging them to turn towards them. And so there's this common pull, and I have no evidence to know it's because of social media, but there's this common pull to be like, I'm going to come talk to you about that and tell you, my therapist, how much I hate it, but I'm not going to talk to them. Like that's usually the biggest thing of, oh no, if you want anything to change, you are going to talk to them.
And it's like that with intimate relationships. Absolutely. Too. It's so unfortunate. You hear, I mean, people think that if you're a social psychologist, that means that you can answer therapeutic questions. But I can't count the number of times where someone has brought an issue, and the first question, have you talked to them about it? Well, no. It's pretty shocking. So, okay, so addressing it with their roommate is definitely something that you need to be clear about with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that step is a really difficult one. Like I can't tell you how many times I've had shocked looks that's what I'm highly recommending, because them just complaining to me isn't ever going to build up. How do you become vulnerable with another person in an assertive way and say, hey, when you did this, I felt sad, or I felt like, this space wasn't safe for me anymore. There's certain assumptions that people feel like if I become vulnerable with this person, they're going to shape it into a spear and always use it against me. And while I get, being vulnerable is risky, it is, like you're alluding to, in a romantic relationship, in a friendship, in a good roommate environment, it is the only way we cultivate something that's healthy and happy and we look forward to.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, I do want to talk about one more thing. The course I'm teaching, we talk a lot about the concept of play, right? So just sort of this just a quick guideline for play. It's it's purposeless, it's fun, it's physical, it's active. There's potential for improvisation. The name of the book that we use for the course is called Play by Stuart Brown. Mm-hmm. And he postulates that play is underestimated in terms of its contribution to well-being, is specifically with stress reduction, specifically with anxiety. Mm-hmm. You'd mentioned, or I believe in your bio, you had mentioned that you incorporate some yoga into your practice a little bit. Could you talk about the role of physicality and how that might how does that how do you recommend that to somebody to incorporate in their life to reduce stress?
Yeah, we know there's such a huge relationship between being active and physical and reducing the amount of cortisol in the blood. Um, I think it's essential. Whether I'm meeting with somebody and they're presenting with anxiety, depression, that's always one of the first things I'll ask when I'm doing a biopsychosocial is how much movement, physical movement, do you have in your life? And I really want to know, okay, what did yesterday look like? Like, how were you active? And because I want to know, is this person who's moving from seated in the car to seated on the couch to again, all these sort of rigid postures, which we know for human beings, we haven't evolved this way. Our body is designed to move. And there's good research, especially with just comparing yoga to psychotherapy, that yoga is very close to being as effective. And I think that's awesome. And I think that's great. And it says something to the effect of how stagnant we can become under stress or just in the ways our jobs are shaping of us just sitting over a computer for long hours. Students that's their favorite part of the mindfulness stress reduction course. At the end of the semester, I always ask, what was the thing you enjoyed the most? It's always yoga. Yoga always wins. Because I think for a lot of people, this is their one time throughout the day that they got to move around their body and kind of wake themselves up instead of holding these same kind of leaned over a computer or cell phone postures.
Yeah. Well, I think you summed up the episode with it's going to be my favorite quote. Yoga always wins. That's going to be that is definitely going to be my favorite quote of the episode.
Namaste to that.
So I'm going to wrap it up. If you want to see more of Justin, check out his YouTube channel, which is A Modern Therapist. Just go to YouTube, type in A Modern Therapist. You'll see videos on stress reduction and mindfulness and all kinds of other good stuff. So I want to thank you very much for being on. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Ryan. Anytime.
For more on Justin, head over to Instagram or TikTok and type in @AModernTherapist. Once again, that's @AModernTherapist. And while you're on Instagram, follow this podcast @Why Do We Do That Podcast. Don't forget to rate and review us on iTunes. Follow our Facebook page for episode updates and additional content. You can also head over to Twitter and follow us @WDWDTPod on Twitter. Also, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or email me at whydowedothatpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Dr. Ryan Moyer, hoping you found some answers to the question, why do we do that?